With each version of Microsoft Windows, configuring networking has gotten much easier, and with the new Windows 7 operating system, that trend has definitely continued. And that's good news for home users in particular, but for us corporate users who deal with networking on a day-to-day basis, you'll probably be able to jump straight into Windows 7 and immediately configure networking, although the interface is slightly different from previous versions. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the basics of Windows networking with workgroups. And in a separate video, we're going to talk about the new home group feature of Windows 7. Now, before we get started here, from a Windows 7 perspective, some things have changed under the hood with TCP/IP since Windows XP. And whilst you don't interact with them directly, they are there running in the background. So firstly, the performance of TCP/IP in Windows 7 is supposedly better than previous versions of Windows, with Microsoft claiming that they've made changes to the TCP/IP stack on Windows 7 so that it dynamically adjusts its receiving windows, which gives it better performance. Now, Windows 7 also provides better troubleshooting for network problems and throws in a dual-layer IPv4 and IPv6 capability so that Windows 7 will work out of the box with IP version 6 without you having to do anything. But like with Windows Vista, the configuration of Windows 7 networking is now done through a new interface called the Network and Sharing Center. So let's go and take a look at it. So to get to the Network and Sharing Center, we've got a couple of ways we can get there. All of them are pretty similar. Firstly, down in the system tray area, you're going to see this network card icon. When we right click on it, it'll give us an option to fire up the Network and Sharing Center. Alternatively, if we left click on this, it'll give you a slightly different window where you can see what networks you're currently connected to. And again, you can also open the Network and Sharing Center. Now, I'm going to tell you up front that using either of these two methods, either right clicking or left clicking here on this little icon, is most likely the method that you'll use, as I think personally it's the quickest. Now, another way to open the Network and Sharing Center though is to click Start and open up the control panel. We'll choose Network and Internet. And up the top, we can have our Network and Sharing link, which we can open up there. Now, another way of getting to the same place is to click Start and just start typing in Network, and you'll see the Network and Sharing Center. So you can use any of those four methods there, and we're all going to get to the same place, which is to start up the Network and Sharing Center. All right, so this is the Network and Sharing Center, and this is where you'll perform most of your network configuration from all the links on this window. So at the very top of this window here, we've got this basic network map that depicts my network of my Windows 7 machine here, which of course has the host name of Windows 7B. It's connected to my router, which in turn provides my connection through to the internet. Now, one of the nice features about this map is that if you are experiencing problems with any part of your network, then that part on the map would be grayed out. So let's say that my router here in the middle, depicted as network, is having problems connecting to my ISP. Then I wouldn't have internet access. So this Earth icon here, depicting the internet, of course, would be grayed out, indicating that I don't have internet access. Now, you can also use a full network map as well if you do have the hardware that supports it. And if you do, Windows 7 will then build a map that's representative of our network, including the interfaces we've selected. Now, I will point out one thing, though, that if you are connected to a work group, then you will be able to use this feature. But if your Windows 7 computer is joined to a domain and you try to view the network map, you'll be told that you can't. So for you guys that are connected to a domain and you want to use this feature, to get it to work, this is what you'll need to do. We'll need to go and click Start. We'll type in gpedit.msc and we'll hit Enter. That's going to open up our local group policy editor. Underneath the computer configuration heading here on the left-hand side, we're going to expand administrative templates. We'll then expand network, and we're going to choose link layer topology discovery. And the right-hand side here, we've got two options. The first one is the one that we need to configure, turn on mapper IO. And this is used to discover other devices on the network. So we will need to enable this policy for our network map to work when connected to a domain. So we'd right-click, we'll choose Edit. We then change this to Enabled. And we'll want to check this box here to allow operation while in a domain, and that's what we'd want. Now, these other options here, of course, are optional for our purposes, but you can change those if you like. All right, so if you're connected to a domain, that's how you get it to work. If you're in a workgroup mode, then you can ignore that step. Now, once you have made those changes, by the way, they will be live and in effect. So if you do happen to have your network map open, you'll need to close it and reopen it, and that'll then populate as you'd expect. But that's only for Windows 7 computers that are connected to a domain. Don't forget that. If you're in a work group, you don't need to do any of that. Now, also notice up the top here that connecting these icons are these two thin blue lines. Now, this indicates that I'm using a wired connection, probably with Cat5 or Cat6 cable. If you happen to be using a wireless connection, then these lines will change to a dashed line. Now, you can also click on these icons here as well. So if I was to click on, say, my computer icon here, that'll open up Windows Explorer. If I click on my gateway icon, that's going to open up Network Neighborhood View, and there's some of the other machines we have in our lab. And if I click the Earth icon, that'll then fire up Internet Explorer. Okay, well, beneath our little network map here, you can see the type of network we're using, or the type of network that we're connected to, which is a private network using the work network. And that's providing both local and internet access via our local area connection, which of course is my Ethernet card that's sitting inside my computer. Now, if we click on this work network link on the left here, we can then change our network location type to a home network or to a public network if we like. And if we just cancel this for a moment and then click on this little building icon here, we're also able to change the name of the network. And if you're really pedantic about it, you can also change the icon shown that represents the network here on your network map. Okay, now we can also view and configure our network card here as well, clicking this local area connection link. So for my network card, and this is the same sort of information you'd expect from Windows since the dawn of time, because not much really has changed here. We can choose to disable this interface if we like, and we can diagnose any problems that we might be experiencing with this connection. And if we click on the Properties button, most of you guys that are familiar with Windows XP or Windows Vista, you're going to instantly recognize this window where we can configure our network card. Now, you can do all this from the Network and Sharing Center window as well, of course. So let's just cancel this for now. And if we come over here to the left-hand side of our menu, we can choose to change our adapter settings. So let's click that, and we're going to see all of the network connections that we have in our computer. And we can configure these cards in exactly the same way as previous Windows operating systems by simply right-clicking and choosing Properties. All right, well, let's quickly run through these items in this list here, although for most of you listening to this video, you're probably aware of what they do. The first option we have, Client for Microsoft Networks, is used by Windows to allow your computer to access other devices on the network. We have Qos Packet Scheduler, Quality of Service Packet Scheduler. This is used for services that can take advantage of QoS, things like voice over IP and media streaming. We have File and Printer Sharing for Microsoft Networks, which is, as the name suggests, used to allow other computers to access files and folders and printers on your computer. Now, in most cases, you're going to leave this turned on unless this interface happens to be an internet-facing network card on a firewall. In that case, you'd want to turn it off. Now we have IP version 6 and IP version 4, which is our TCP/IP protocol. We want to leave those enabled, of course. And down the bottom here, we have our link layer topology mapper and link layer topology discovery responders, which are used to discover devices on our network and to let other devices discover our computer. Now, up the top, if we click on the Configure button, we can further configure our network card. And I'm not going to go into this too much because a lot of the properties you'll see here are going to be different for different network cards. But specifically, the driver tab here, the third tab along, if you're having problems with this card or there's a newer driver that you wish to install, you can do that here by clicking on the Update Driver button and then simply browsing to a location where you have new drivers. All right, well, let's cancel this now. And we're going to right-click on our network card again and choose Properties. We're going to select IP version 4, and we'll choose properties again, or we could just double click on IP version 4. And this is exactly the same that you'd be used to in other versions of Windows, where we can choose to use a DHCP server to supply this computer with an IP address. And if your computer's in a corporate domain, or you even might be a home user connecting to the internet through your DSL modem or a cable modem, you might be required to use DHCP, in which case you simply check this box here to obtain an IP address automatically. And down the bottom, in most cases, the same is going to apply, and you'll likely need to obtain a DNS server address automatically, which will probably be provided by your DHCP server. Now, if like me, that you don't have a DHCP server handy, you can enter in those values manually and then use a static IP address. Simply enter in your IP address, subnet mask and default gateway, your DNS server address, and you're done. Again, this really hasn't changed from Windows XP or Windows Vista, so you guys listening to this probably aren't seeing anything new here. All right, well, let's go back now to our network and sharing center. And let's see how we can connect to a Windows 7 network. Now, since I'm already connected to a network, if I choose this second option here, connect to a network, it's just going to pop up this window here telling us that I'm already connected to one. So there's nothing to do here. But you will note that we do have this new option here called a home group. But I'm not going to go into detail about this now. We're going to do that in another separate video, because there's a fair bit to talk about with that new feature, and it definitely deserves its own topic. Now, down the bottom here, we're also able to try and diagnose problems if we're experiencing problems connecting to a network. And surprisingly, this is rather good for low-level problem diagnosis. So it will tell you things like if a network cable isn't plugged in, something that's tricked up a lot of us in the past. Now, at the top here, we can also set up a new connection or network as well. So let's see how we can go about setting up a new connection. All right, now this is going to pop up a new window where we've got 4 options in this case, but be aware that if you're doing this on your computer, you might see more connection choices than I have listed here. For example, if you're doing this on your notebook and you've got a Bluetooth dongle in there, you're going to see Bluetooth listed here. Or if you've got a wireless network card, you're going to see additional wireless options here. Okay, so the standard options you're likely to see on your PC, regardless of its configuration, is to connect to the internet using a wireless, broadband, or dial-up connection. We can configure a router or an access point. We can connect to a workplace using dial-up or VPN. And we can set up a dial-up connection, which we all loathe nowadays since it's so slow and it really is a last resort thing. Now, in most cases, though, you're probably not going to come in here to set up these options, maybe with the exception of your VPN or your wireless connection. And the reason is that a normal wired Ethernet connection, you'll configure by changing the properties of your network card, like we're already seeing. And dial-up, well, hopefully you're never going to have to use it anymore unless you're extremely lucky. So let's take a look at how we can set up what's going to be the most common connection here. And that's going to be using a VPN. So we'll select the third option here and we'll click Next. And if, by the way, you haven't used VPN connections before or configured them in Windows, you're going to be amazed at how simple it is to set this thing up. But the real configuration is done at the other end of the connection when you set up Windows Server to accept incoming connections. But from a client perspective, it's really trivial to configure this. All right, well, we've got 2 options here when we configure our VPN connection. Do we want to go through our existing internet connection to connect to another network over the internet, or do we want to dial in directly? Now, whatever you choose here will, of course, depend on how your VPN is set up at the other end of the connection, and in most cases, you're going to probably choose the first option here. But again, check with your own IT department which option you should choose. Well, the first thing we'll need to do when we select the top option here is to configure the host we want to connect to. Now, this could be an IP address or a host name, and again, you're going to get this from the people that you're trying to connect to. So for argument's sake, let's just enter in vpn.mycompany.com. We can give our VPN connection a name as well, and I'll just call that My Company VPN. And that's a good idea to rename this, especially if you're going to have several VPN connections. That way, it just makes it easy to identify what they're for later on. Now, if your company does also use smart cards for authentication, you can check that here. We can also allow other users of this computer to use this connection if we like. And we can choose to not connect now and just set this up and we can connect later on. All right, well, let's click Next. And the final thing we'll need to do is to enter in the credentials of a user that's going to have the ability to connect to this host via our VPN. So we'll enter in a username. Again, this will be provided by your IT people. And we can enter in an optional domain as well, and then click Create. Okay, well, it's been created. Let's click Close. And now if we choose to connect to a network, you're going to see our dial-up and VPN connections listed here alongside any wireless connections we might have as well. So they're all going to be located here in one easy to reach place ready to be used. Okay, now on the left-hand side here of our network sharing center, we do have another option here where we can change our advanced sharing settings. Now this is where we can turn on or turn off most of the other common configuration options, things such as network discovery, which is currently on, and things like file and printer sharing. Now, since most of the options in this window here relate to file and printer sharing, it's something we're going to look at in other videos. So I'm only going to concern myself here with this first option, which is network discovery. Although all of these features here work in exactly the same way, simply click the on button or the off button to enable or to disable the feature. And that's it really. So this network discovery feature is just a setting that affects whether your Windows 7 computer is able to find other devices on the network and whether those devices can find yours. So if you want to be able to share files and folders and printers with other users, then you'll need to turn this feature on. Now, the other thing I want to talk about in this video on Windows 7 networking is internet connection sharing. You know, many home users now have more than one PC, or they've got additional networkable devices, things like PDAs or Xboxes and things like that. And they want to have each device have access to the internet through the family internet connection. Now, of course, the best way of connecting several devices to the same internet connection is to use a router with a built-in switch or wireless, and that enables us to plug in several devices at once to use the internet. And since routers nowadays are pretty cheap and they can come in built with wireless access points and print servers, they're certainly worth investing in. Now, once you have one of these routers or you've got wireless, you don't need internet connection sharing at all, and that is the preferable option. But if you don't have a router, that's okay. You can use your internet connection sharing from Windows 7 computer that happens to be directly connected to your dial-up or your broadband modem, and you can share the connection so that your other devices in the home can use it. The only real downside to this is that the computer that's sharing the connection must be switched on for anyone else to be able to use the connection. Whereas if you've got a router that's connected to the modem, then any device is going to be able to access the internet as long as the router remains on, which should be the case, as normally you won't turn it off anyway. Now, the other condition for this to work is that the PC that's connected to the internet will likely have to have 2 network cards in it. I say likely because if it's a dial-up connection that you want to share, you won't need the second network card. Also, if it's a broadband modem that you have connected through a USB interface, again, you won't need a second network card. However, if your modem plugs into your Ethernet port on your computer, then you will need a second network card for other people to be able to access and connect to your computer. So I will point out that before we get started here, although you can use the internet connection sharing with a dial-up modem, you're going to find it to be painfully slow. Well, dial-up's painfully slow at the best of times anyway, so ideally you're really going to want to have a broadband connection for this feature to offer you any chance at having some good internet browsing experiences. So let's get started. Up the top here on the left, we're going to click Change Adapter Settings. And the first thing you'll note is that I only have one network card. So I'm going to quickly reboot this machine. I'm going to add a second network card to it, and we'll be back in just a moment. All right, well, I've just gone and added in a second network card. So the first thing we need to do is to choose which connection we want to share. So that's going to be the connection that currently has internet access. So in this case, let's assume that my local area connection here, our first one, is the connection that I want to share. So we'll assume that it's going to be a dial-up connection or a broadband connection that we want to share. So we'll right-click on it, we'll choose Properties. Now we'll select the Sharing tab, and then we'll check this box here to allow other network users to connect through this computer's internet connection. So this is the box we need to check to enable internet connection sharing. Now we could also choose to allow other users to be able to control or disable this shared internet connection if we like. That's okay if you trust the people. I'll leave that box checked and we'll click OK. Now once we've clicked OK, what's going to happen is Windows is going to change our internal network interface, our second one. This is the one that we want our other devices in the house to connect to. It's going to change its IP address. So let's just take a look at the properties of this card here. And we can see that Windows has changed the IP address of this interface to 192.168.137.1. So what does that mean? Well, it means that internet connection sharing has been configured on this machine. That's all we needed to do. Now, all we need to do for our other devices to be able to get through this machine to the internet, say for example, we've got an Xbox, we want to allow that to get through this computer out to the internet, we'll just need to configure that device with its own IP address that happens to be on the same subnet as this internal interface here. And that's it. So let's just assume that I'm on another computer at home now that wants to access the internet through this machine. We'd right-click on our network card, we'd choose Properties, we'd choose IPv4 just as we've done here, and we'd be at this exact screen. All we then need to do is to change our IP address on that machine so that it now has an IP address of 192.168.137, followed by a number from 2 through to 254. Choose any number from that range, it doesn't matter. And finally, on those computers, let's say our Xbox, we're going to need to ensure that its default gateway points to our internet connection sharing computer. So for that device, we'd need to enter in this IP address in this field here. So again, if we had an Xbox and we wanted to connect it through this machine, that Xbox would need to have an IP address of 192.168.137.2 to 254, any number in between that range. Also, it would need to have a default gateway of 192.168.137.1. In other words, the IP address of this internet connection sharing machine. And that's it. It's pretty easy to configure, but it's largely outdated now since routers are so cheap and most people who've been around computers for a while no longer use this internet connection sharing. Okay, in this video we've taken a look at the various networking options you have with Windows 7. And as you've seen, depending on the hardware inside your machine, there can be a lot of choices you have to start connecting your computer to other networks. We've looked at configuring our wired Ethernet connections, VPNs, and even dial-up. So there's really no reason why networking should be seen as a hard thing to do. Windows 7 makes it really easy to connect to other machines in so many ways. So we hope you've enjoyed this video, and we'd like to thank you for watching.